Welcome to Backlight, where we'll be taking you behind the scenes of our investigations at Lighthouse Reports. Every month, we will be interviewing a lead contributor behind one of our recent investigations for practical insights into how these are conducted. My name is Beatriz Ramalho da Silva, and I'm an investigations reporter at Lighthouse. Today, I'm speaking to my colleague, May Bulman, an investigations editor at Lighthouse, about one of our latest border newsroom investigations, Black Sites. This investigation revealed how refugees are being arbitrarily detained and tortured at secret facilities along EU borders before being illegally pushed back. Hey, May.
Hi, Beatrice.
So, you've been working on this story for quite a few months. You traveled to Serbia and Lithuania to document instances of people being forced back across borders there. Can you speak a bit about how the investigation started?
Sure, yeah. So the investigation kind of came about as many investigations do. It was just kind of people telling us that things were happening. It was actually during a previous investigation, which was focused on like violent pushbacks across borders. But during that, the research and the reporting on that investigation, people on the move were also telling reporters that before being pushed back, they were being held in like various places. And that was something that we hadn't really been aware was happening, that there was any form of kind of detention of these individuals before they're being pushed back. So once that investigation was done, we decided to look at kind of like dig more into these reports of this kind of detention. And we sent more reporters out onto the ground to speak to people. And basically, we managed to trace where these places of detention were by like getting descriptions from people and trying to, ask people like where on a map these places were. And we managed to find a number of them. And essentially, we established that there were these what we ended up calling black sites, so like clandestine detention places where refugees were being held and denied the right to seek asylum and then being pushed back across the border. And some examples of these places were like in Bulgaria, we got strong visual evidence of people being held in this kind of derelict cage-like structure, which kind of looked like some kind of disused dog kennel with bars on one side for like days at a time, sometimes in very overcrowded, grim conditions, before being pushed back to Turkey. And we also found that in Croatia, people were being held in police vans that were not moving, but just being like they were being used as kind of prisons, and people would be locked in there, lots of people at a time. It would get very hot in there, and then they'd be taken back across the border. And then in Hungary, we found that people were being put into kind of shipping containers, lots and lots of people at a time, being detained there before the border police were ready to push them back. And also in Hungary, we established that people were being taken to this petrol station during the night and then forced to just sit on the ground for hours and hours and then being taken back across the border. So, yeah, we found lots of examples of this kind of thing happening. And because these sites operate like outside of formal detention or reception systems, they're completely excluded from any independent scrutiny or public access. So obviously the individuals being held there are at risk of serious violations against them because there's no one checking that the law is being adhered to. And we did hear lots of reports of this kind of thing happening, like violence taking place in these places, and the people in authority really abusing kind of the power that they had. So yeah, we also established that these weren't like the places that we found weren't completely isolated. It seemed to be part of like a wider system. These places were being used to round people up and then enable the border police to like push them back all in one go. So it was kind of easier for them. And that's why these places seem to be being used. And I should also add that we found some of these practices like are funded by the EU. So, there is an element of EU complicity there. Also, in the case of Bulgaria, we found that there were Frontex officers actually parked right outside this cage. So the cage was located in the yard of this border police station. And nearly every time we went to observe what was happening there were Frontex vans parked like meters away. So again, that indicates some kind of EU complicity there as well.
So, you mentioned the EU funding and also you collected a lot of witness testimony. Could you speak about what other methods you used and how also you uncovered visual evidence of these practices?
Yeah, I mean, one of the important parts of this investigation was on the ground monitoring, I guess. So we obviously got a lot of testimony, as you say, that described these places for us. And then we managed to trace where they were. And then it was a case of actually, can we prove that these places are being used for the purpose that we're hearing that they are being used for? So we had reporters going onto the ground and actually just kind of watching what was happening. So with the case of the cage structure in Bulgaria, we had people go and just spend some time at that place, and we could actually, with this cage structure, you could see from the street, you could peer down into it. So it meant that we could have like a good look and see if people were in there. And sure enough, on the I think it was 5 separate days that journalists visited this site across I think like 6 week period, every time there were people in there being held in there, locked in there. So yeah, and we were also able to get visual evidence of that. So we got a GoPro camera and like placed it right on the wall where you could see what was going on in there. So got very kind of clear evidence that people were being held there, and then we were able to kind of listen to what they were saying and get that translated to get a sense of what had happened. Also, that was when we saw the Frontex branded cars parked outside. So yeah, that was important. And another example of the kind of monitoring was when I went to Serbia. We were trying to work out what was happening in Hungary, and I went with two Serbian journalists, and we had a drone with us, and we were able to lift the drone and basically have a good view of this kind of transit zone that the border police there have, which they use to. We established that they are using on a really regular basis, like numerous times a day, to bring people who, asylum seekers in these like prison vans and bring them into this transit zone. And then there's a kind of gate in it, and they would push them out of the gate. So we got evidence of them doing that. And then we had the other Serbian journalist was on the ground with a camera right outside that gate, and would then ask them what had happened to them prior to being pushed back. And that's where we got some of the testimony about people being held in shipping containers and at this petrol station. So yeah, but that did, it was a lot of kind of waiting around as well, because we'd go for like a large part of the day and just watch what was happening. But I think that was a really important element of the investigation. There was also some open source intelligence element to this. So when we were trying to figure out where these places were, that we used satellite imagery in some cases to like identify whether this what someone described was actually there. And then at that point, we might go and actually go and see it for ourselves on the ground. Also, we did make use of social media in terms of open source, finding examples like video footage, photos of these kinds of places being used, especially in the case of the vans in Croatia. And we were able to find like videos posted on TikTok and Instagram of people being like held in these vans in really crowded conditions.
What was the response that the national governments implicated in the investigation had towards the evidence that you found? And was there any other kind of impacts you've seen since the investigation was published?
Yeah, I mean, the governments were not happy. So the Bulgarian government was very angered by what we reported on. Basically, they all kind of tried to deny it, but then they couldn't really fully deny it. But I think that's something that's quite common that we see, like governments just try and pretend that they're not doing something that they are. And then in terms of other impacts, yeah, it got a really good reception, which was good. There was, it was shared very widely on social media, got a lot of secondary coverage, had organizations like Human Rights Watch kind of writing their own big statements on it and putting them out, which was good. We had a group of MEPs who kind of saw the investigation and then took it on themselves to speak to us and ask, in terms of the EU funding side of things, what else could they try to get out of Brussels to find, exactly what was going on here. Why was this funding going towards these practices? So they were, MEPs came forward and were keen to try and dig more information out to try and change things. And then more recently, actually, the European Court of Auditors has announced that they're assessing whether the EU Commission has been effective in protecting the EU's financial interests and taking steps to ensure that like countries receiving EU funding for their border policing and other things are respecting the rule of law. And that seems to be kind of a bit of a kind of influenced by our investigation, which is good. So I think that kind of EU funding side of it is definitely being looked into more now, which hopefully will, have a positive impact and will mean that these kinds of practices don't end up getting the funding from the EU, given that they're kind of, it's in violation of the law. So I think it's had a pretty good impact, and hopefully we'll see some changes coming out of that.
Thank you for listening. You can find the write up for the Black Sites investigations and links to the publications on the Lighthouse Reports website.